Hi, I am Richard Redmond, host of the Plays the Thing. I bid you welcome. On the program tonight, in honor of Halloween, we will have a reading from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, followed by an excerpt from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, followed by two monologues from Dialogues of the Dead, written by Lucian, adapted by yours truly. Rounding up the program, we will have a monologue from H. G. Wells' The Invisible Man, featuring the Invisible Man himself. So, sit back, relax, turn on the lights, and have a frightfully good time. It's alive! It's alive!
The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once, upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here for evermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating to some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, "This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger. Hesitating then no longer, "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you, and here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven, of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly, grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvelled at this ungainly fowl, to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing a bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above this chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. And then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at this stillness broken by reply, so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloated o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul, with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aiden It shall clasp a scented maiden, a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out thy heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. An excerpt from Frankenstein by Mary W. Shelley. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishments of my toils. With an anxiety that amounted almost to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain patterned dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing. His teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length lassitude succumbed and succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy, again endued with animation, could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me. And the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes the church of Ingolstadt, its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare to return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled to hurry on, although drenched by the rain which poured from a black and comfortless sky. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by bodily exercise to ease that load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me, like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round, walks on and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. You have heard, Chiron, that I died of my own choice. Well, you were correctly informed. I am dead, as you see, and I might have lived for a longer time. I am sure you must wonder what possessed me to be in love with death. He has no charm for most people. You are a sensible fellow, I will tell you. There was no further satisfaction to be had from living. It was not a pleasure merely to live and see the light. No, it is variety, as I take it, and not monotony, that constitutes pleasure. Living on and on, everything always the same. Sun, light, food, spring, summer, autumn, winter, one thing following another in unending sequence. I sickened of it all. I found that enjoyment was not in continual possession, that deprivation had its share therein. Since I have made this netherworld kingdom, this abode of the shades of the dead, my home, it has not been too unpleasant. I like the truly Republican equality that prevails. And as to whether one is in light or darkness, well, that makes no difference at all. And then again, there is no hunger or thirst here. One is independent of such things. However, I must admit I am caught in the snare of my own reasonings. For if the monotony of the other world brought on satiety, the monotony here may do the same. I have looked about for a change, and I fancy there is no third life procurable. I must now take things as I find them and try to make the best of everything. There is no going back.
Mr. Gibbs, it's not fair that I should have died at the age of 30 and my rich Uncle Brigham should go on living past the age of 98. He told me that I was supposed to be the sole heir to his estate, which was valued in the millions. It's just not right that an old man like that, who can no longer derive any pleasure from his money, didn't die first. It's all wrong. There ought to be a proper sequence for death, according to seniority. Things are turned upside down if an old man can go on living with only 3 teeth in his head, half blind, tottering about with a pair of crutches on each side to hold them up, driveling, having no joy of life, a living tomb, being ridiculed by his juniors, and I, a young man, dies in the prime of my strength and beauty? It's against the laws of nature. I had a right to know that I was to die first, so then I wouldn't have wasted my time kissing up to the old man, throwing all my attention on him, and for nothing. He always looked as if he were at the point of death. I didn't want to waste my time always going to see him, but if I didn't show up, he'd have me summoned to him, and then he'd groan and squeak like a chicken barely out of the shell. He derived pleasure out of having me at his beck and call. I considered that at any moment he might step into his coffin, and then I'd finally be rid of him and come into his fortune. Yes, his fortune. For fear of being written out of his will, I spent anxious, sleepless nights worrying that he would favor someone else with his money. It was the sleeplessness, the anxiety, and the worry that brought me to my death. And the irony is that he attended my funeral chuckling. For you see, I never was in his will at all. The joke was on me.
It's horrible enough. But I shall tell you the whole story. First, though, you must get me some food and light the fire. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm cold. Yes, I shall tell you the whole story. But you must promise not to tell a soul. You will make a bargain with me, Dr. Kemp. Do not forget for an instant that though you cannot see me, I can see you all the time. One false move, one sign of giving warning to anyone, and you are as good as dead. There, I see by your face you understand. Now, get me some food, and I must eat. Then I shall tell you my story. You shall hear me out. Yes, Dr. Kemp, you shall hear me out to the bitter end. may remember that at the college I was much interested in the problem of light. As an albino, I suppose I was naturally attracted to the subject of pigments. I began to do some experiments in changing the color of various substances. Finally, quite by accident, I hit on a method of rendering any inert object, a piece of wood, a bit of meat, even a lump of coal, absolutely as colorless, as transparent as water. Suddenly, I had a brilliant idea. If I could transform inert matter, why not a living animal? A human being. In short, why not make myself invisible? I worked at it for years, and at last I succeeded. I will not bore you with the details of my experiments. I am too tired, and besides, they are all written down in my notebooks, and you shall read them. I was forced to leave those precious notebooks behind in Lipton when I made my escape. But with your help, I shall recover them. I've had many adventures as an invisible man, but it is not going as I had planned. I am invisible only when I am undressed. With clothes on, I can be seen as easily as you. Do you know what it's like to run through the streets and the fields on a night like this without a stitch on one's back? I may die of cold. Yes, you nod your head. I had not thought the thing through, I confess. While I was still experimenting, I saw only the advantages of the thing. But there are disadvantages, I can tell you. I cannot rest until I am sure that no one will discover me. I cannot eat unless I am alone, for I would be found out by the spoon floating in midair. In short, I am confounded at every turn. Dogs nip at my feet. They pick up my scent even if they don't see me. There's no end to the trouble. That is why this is such a stroke of luck, my running into you. Just think, man, I need an accomplice. With you in on my secret, I can take refuge in your house. I can sleep in your bed, eat at your table, warm myself by your fire, and none will be wiser. I made a huge mistake, Kemp, in trying to carry the thing through alone. Alone there is so little I can do, but with a Confederate, 1,000 things are possible.